morning, buenos días, sabah al khair, assalamu alaikum. My name is Olivia Orozco, and I coordinate the program of education and economics in Casa Árabe. Today, I would like to welcome you all to this roundtable online on Islamic finance in Algeria, new developments and prospects. As many of you know, Islamic finance in Algeria had a very small impact in the country till recently. Indeed, we may say that Algeria was one of the countries in the Arab and even Muslim world where Islamic finance had a smaller share within the national banking system. However, last year, the government put forward a series of measures and policies to promote Islamic finance that may change this situation. Among them, a new regulation was introduced in March 15, 2020, that defines the operations and rules for the practice of Islamic finance in the country. It also established the National Shariah Fatwa Board for Islamic finance industry, which is the body that certifies if a bank or financial institution is Sharia compliant, and so can operate within that framework. And then in August 2020, last summer, Algeria's National Bank officially launched its Islamic finance services. At the end of January this year, just some weeks ago, the Algeria government also presented a draft executive decree to regulate takaful businesses, which is the insurance services compliant with Islamic law. So given the novelty and importance of these developments, we thought it would be interesting to analyze them and then understand why now and how, and identify the challenges and prospects for the development of the industry in the country. So for that, we come today with an excellent panel of experts and practitioners, which I would like to welcome. Fatiha Talahid, senior researcher with the CNRS and member of GRESPA GTM, which is the Center for Sociological and Political Research, which is connected from Paris. Mohamed Boujelal, professor of economics at the University of Nisila, also connected from there in Algeria. Zakaria Islimani, assistant to the general manager at Bank Al Baraka of Algeria, connected from Algiers. And Abdelhafid Ben Amraoui, which is principal lecturer in finance at the University of Westminster, connected from London. So let me thank all them for making some time in their agendas and connecting with us today. Thank you very much. You are really welcome. We appreciate it. And I would like also to thank especially Fatiha Talahid as well as Mehmeda Sutai, professor from Durham University, for their help in gathering this panel. With both of them and with Randy De Guillem, we organized an international conference on Islamic financial institutions in Arab transitions in 2015 in Casa Árabe in Madrid, which dealt already with the different developments and transformations that were taking place in the countries of the north of Africa, including Egypt, after the transformations brought by the so-called Arab Spring. Those papers were published in a special issue of our journal, published in 2017. And then when we presented them, we dedicated also a session to Islamic finance in Morocco, who was the country where Islamic finance had advanced most in those years with Tunisia. Now we have also Algeria, which seems to be following their lead. So in that way, this roundtable follows from that work we did then, and following up these last developments in the countries of the region. The objective is to explore the relevance and challenges of these new developments for the whole region as well. It's organized in the framework of the Observatory of Islamic Finance in Spain, which we created also in 2017 with the CF, which is the Saudi Spanish Center of Islamic Economics and Finance, created as well between the IE Business School and King Abdulaziz University, from where I think they will be also following us today. And the Observatory is a group for analysis and consultation in Spain to expand knowledge about the current state of Islamic finance. And it includes the main experts, consultants, law firms, and banking institutions working with or being specialized in the subject in Spain. So I would like to welcome you all, and thank you all for including the members of the Observatory connecting today. And let me tell you that the roundtable will be organized in 2 rounds of questions for the speakers. Then we'll have a first reaction from Gonzalo Rodriguez, General Coordinator at the CF, to be followed by questions from the audience that you can send to us via the chat, and I will just translate them to the speakers. So I will start with Fatiha. Fatiha, good morning. Fatiha Talahid is an expert on Algerian economy and its financial and industrial sectors. She has worked extensively on the transformation of the Algerian economy and the institutional changes to the socialist period, the banking and financial reforms of the late 1990s, and she's publishing an article now that is in press on the monetary policy under Bouteflika rule. She also coordinated, as mentioned, and contributed to the International Conference on Islamic Finance in North Africa, organized in 2015, and with a paper she did on Islamic Finance in Algeria. So Fatiha, based in the research and work you did for the meetings we organized and your knowledge about Algerian economy, could you offer us to start with a kind of historical introduction of what has been Islamic finance in Algeria prior to last year's developments, and how do you value or perceive the relevance of these changes now? Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. Algeria has been the first country in the Maghreb in setting up Islamic banks. The reform of 1989-1991 led to an economic and political liberalization. The banking reform, called the Currency and Credit Act of 1990, has made possible the opening of the first Islamic bank in 1991. The new Currency and Credit Council of the Central Bank, Bank of Algeria, approved the first private Islamic bank under Algeria law, Al Baraka Bank Algeria, which is a foreign bank, Bahrain-based Al Baraka Banking Group, and the Saudi group, Dalla Al Baraka. But this reform was interrupted in 1992, and it has not been completed to this day. Since then, only 2 other banks, Al Salam Algeria and Gulf Bank, and one insurance company, Salama Insurance Algeria, opened. This market has not yet developed. It still remains marginal and represents in 2017 5% of the national financial system and nearly 15% of private banks. According to Jaffrey, Islamic finance is thus a kind of shadow industry in Algeria with no clear-cut Sharia governance framework and regulations. The existing Islamic banks operate based on their own rules, each one being responsible for the Sharia compliance of their products. As a consequence of this situation, this market has declined. And there is a survey in 2018 that showed that Algeria is one of the 11 jurisdictions where this sector declined. Yet there is a real demand for Islamic finance products in Algeria. A survey by the American Gallup Institute in 2013 showed that only 3% of Algerians used Islamic financial products, and 35% have already heard about, but nearly 15%, near 1 out of 2 Algerians would accept to pay 33% more for Islamic rather than conventional financing. And it is estimated that 40 to 50% of the money supply is hoarded outside the banking circuits because of the practice of interest by the banks of the place. And there is also a real enthusiasm for Islamic finance among Algerian academics, with a growing number of publications, even if not always of high quality, and participation in international conferences. This creates contrast with the lack of interest on the part of the authorities. In 2016, the CERIC, Statistical, Economic and Social Research for Islamic Countries, launched a survey on current practices of the Organization of Islamic Countries on Islamic banking and financial data, and the Algerian National Office of Statistics gave no response to the survey. The main reason for the non-development of Islamic finance in Algeria is that the authorities have not created the necessary legal and regulatory framework. When one of the first concerns that arise as Islamic banking emerged within a conventional system is how to embed Islamic activities into the existing juridical and supervisory framework. And this question addresses two aspects, the legal aspect and the regulatory aspect. In most of the jurisdictions with modern legal system, the legal setup is typically flexible enough to allow the parties involved to write their own contracts. So there is not a lot to adapt. But in Algeria, the financial system is very archaic and is struggling to modernize despite recurrent announcements to that effect. It is one of the most archaic banking systems in the world. It has inherited the French model, which is not the most adequate for the development of the Islamic finance. And paradoxically, it is dominated by public banks, but paradoxically, only certain foreign banks are currently allowed to offer Islamic banking products. Until recently, public banks have not been involved in the Islamic finance, except some experiences. The system is very rigid and does not give individuals and economic operators who do not identify with conventional finance the possibility to accessing financial services that meet their expectations. There is a change or a shudder, a quivering, following the fall in oil prices in 2014 and the ensuing liquidity crisis. In January 2017, during the Minister of Finance said that his department was examining with the banks of the play the possibility of launching new interest-free banking products with profit margin. And also, he said that they were studying the feasibility to launch an interest-free bond issue with margin indexed on the growth rate that would be specifically aimed at holders of capital in dinars circulating outside the banking channel. A bond issue was launched in 2016 with annual interest rates ranging from 5 to 5.57%, which did not meet with convincing success. The yield of the second series of securities would be indexed on the growth rate. In 2018, the Bank of Algeria released its long-awaited Islamic banking regulation, published at the end of 2018, to govern the implementation of Islamic finance in Algeria. The regulation laid down the rules that need to be implemented by what they call participatory finance, the name given in this act for Islamic finance institutions. And it also outlined the contracts that can be used by Islamic financial institutions. Still, the regulation was not that comprehensive, and many important issues were not well elaborated. And in 2019, With the new government formed in Algeria at the end of 2019, so after the rise of the Hirak, the previous regulation was enhanced and further developed. The new act, published in March 2020, clearly mentions the term Islamic finance instead of participatory finance, which was used in the previous regulation. It defines all contracts that can be used by Islamic financial institutions, such as musharaka, murabaha, ijara, mudaraba, istithna, and salam. And it's interesting to note that they are not identified as contracts, but as banking operation. But they are defined, each one is defined as a contract, but they are identified as, I think it's the French practice, tradition. These banking operations are subject to an application to the Bank of Algeria for advance authorization, and before submitting the application for approval, Islamic financial institution must obtain a certificate from the National Sharia Committee of Fatwa for Islamic Financial Institution, which was just established on the 1st April 2020. So, in addition to this external control body, an internal control mechanism is set up. Islamic financial institutions are required to establish a Sharia committee at the Islamic financial institution level, which should consist of at least 3 members who should be appointed by the General Assembly. The role of the Sharia committee is to ensure that all activities and operations carried out by the Islamic financial institution are in compliance with Sharia. The regulation also defines Islamic banking window, which are structured within conventional banks or financial institutions. The cumbersome procedures and the resulting costs can create conditions that do not guarantee the rule of competition between financial institutions. So, according to Jaffrey, Islamic financial institutions in Algeria need to have a Sharia governance framework to strengthen the Sharia compliance mechanism within Islamic financial institutions and ensure that all relevant Islamic financial institution regulations comply with Sharia rules and principles. In other words, the Sharia governance framework would be concerned with practices, systems, policies, procedures, and measures by which the institution's performance is controlled and monitored and its problems addressed. In addition, the SGF would define the relationship between the National Sharia Committee of Fatwa for Islamic Financial Institutions and the Sharia Committee at the Islamic financial institution level, and it will determine the duties and key responsibilities of the board with regards to the implementation of Sharia governance within the Islamic financial institutions. Till now, the High Islamic Council has announced the establishment of an overseeing body of the Islamic finance industry named Sharia National Fatwa Authority in April 2020. But since now we don't know a lot about this authority and how it is ruled. There is no information about that. And thank you. Okay.
We can find answers to that question with our next speaker. I will pass now the question to Professor Mohamed Boujela, which is, we could say he's one of the main economists in Algeria involved in the last developments towards Islamic finance in the country. He's a specialist in Islamic finance and member of the High Islamic Council, as well as founding member and expert in the National Zakat Fund in Algeria. He also was a Sharia advisor for banks, insurances, and financial markets. Mohammed, could you explain us with some more detail which has been these new developments in the promotion of Islamic finance in Algeria, maybe since last year, but in the framework you prefer. Answering a bit, kind of clarifying a bit the questions Fatiha just raised. Is it participating in the different forms of explicit governmental program to promote the industry? And if so, how has it been put forward and being articulated? Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Olivia. Thank you for this invitation and this roundtable. I should thank all the colleagues that responded to this invitation. Particularly, I would thank Dr. Fatiha, who has really well summarized the history of Islamic banking, the recent history of Islamic banking in Algeria. First of all, as I said later, fasting is healthy for the body. I would say Islamic finance is healthy for the economy, as every financial transaction is closely linked to real assets. And that's why we often say that in Islamic finance, we've got asset-backed transactions. If we try to link Islamic finance to Algeria, I would cite here 3 major events that demonstrate that Algeria is the country from where the idea of Islamic finance has emerged in the Islamic world. The first event goes back to 1929, under the French colonization, when an eminent Algerian scholar called Ibrahim Abul Yaqadan, who presented a project to create an Algerian Islamic Bank. He has called it like that, Algerian Islamic Bank. So that goes back to 1929, about 1 century ago. Of course, the French authorities were not there to facilitate the life for the Algerians. So they rejected the idea, as you know. The second event is that in 1982, the first ever researcher to present a dissertation in an English university, a British university, on Islamic banking, it was in 1982 in Herotwat University, Edinburgh. And it was me who presented that dissertation, for which I was granted the prize of best student, 1982, at the university, at Herotwat University. Following that, in 1991, in Algeria, has been created what we call the AOFI, Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions, which is now the international body to settle standards for Islamic financial practices, whether banking, whether takaful insurance, Islamic insurance, sukuk, etc. So these 3 major events demonstrate clearly that Algeria is the land, the country from where the idea of Islamic Bank has been launched. It is true that if we go back to the history of Islamic banks, the first ever banks go back to the 1975. We saw the creation of the Islamic Development Bank, which is a multinational government bank. After that, we've got, in the meantime, we've got Islamic Bank of Dubai. Then in 1978, we've got the creation of Kuwait Finance House, etc. Then comes the experience of Iran, of Pakistan, of Malaysia, etc. So now, as you know, Islamic finance is practiced in more than 75 countries in the world. So having presented these three major events, now I would say that during the 3 decades, the last 3 decades, Algeria has known 3 major events as well. In 1991, we saw the creation of Bank Al Baraka, which is a mixed bank between an international body called Dar al-Mal Islami, based in Bahrain, 50% of capital, and the other 50% is a public Algerian bank, which is called Badr. Then in 2008, 2008 donc, we saw the creation of Salam Bank, which is another Islamic, fully fledged Islamic bank created in Algeria. Till 2020, last year, with the publication of the 2002 banking rule, governing, of course, clearly, as Fatiha said, what we call Islamic or Islamic finance or Islamic banks. This rule now has really paved the way to the establishment of Islamic banking in Algeria. Of course, the rule speaks about Islamic windows, but inshallah, we are working closely with the monetary authorities within the future, inshallah. We will elaborate, develop a more mature legislative text to govern the industry of Islamic banking. Up to now, to respond to your question, in Algeria we have 22 banks. Up to now, around half of this number are now launching Islamic banking products. You know, in Algeria, the banking market in Algeria is a bit particular because the 6 public banks dominate around 90% of the banking market. So now that the banking rule has paved the way for government banks or public banks to launch Islamic products, Islamic banking products, I think Islamic banking has a good prospects in Algeria. So 5 public banks have already got the first, the certification, the authorization of the Sharia National Authority, which has been constituted in the 1st of April, following the publication of the banking rule concerning Islamic finance. And to say the truth, I was the pioneering in this work. I worked closely with the monetary authorities, and I am a member of this Sharia National Authority for Fatwa for Islamic financial industry. So 5 public banks are already launching their products gradually. The last bank, which is Banque Extérieure d'Algérie, Algerian External Bank, has already formed its Sharia board and is now about launching its own Islamic banking products. Concerning the private banks in Algeria, which are quite numerous, I think we've got about more than 10 private banks. 3 of them have already are launching Islamic financial products. ABC Bank, Arab Banking Corporation, AGB, Arab Gulf Banking Algeria, Algerian Arab Gulf Banks, and Housing Bank. These 3 banks have already got the authorization to offer Islamic banking products. What I may say is that up to now, the French banks operating in Algeria have not yet launched Islamic banking products. So that's all what I can say about my proper experience in Islamic banking in Algeria, and I may respond to the questions. Thank you.
Clarification about the origins or the leading role played by Algeria. I didn't know about the initiative of 1929. I think it's very little known in the literature. I guess there are many countries who context that role, no, being the pioneers, including Egypt, Malaysia, as you mentioned, Pakistan. But it would be interesting to know more. I will ask you later.
Yes, those are historical events,
Yes.
Olivia. Those are historical events that we cannot change. History is history.
Yeah, but it has to be known in the literature, which is the important thing. So yeah, thanks a lot. And if I may, I'm going to turn now to another specialist, also in the Crown, that as Professor has been involved in the industry in Algeria, Zakaria Slimani, who is assistant to the general manager at Bank Al Baraka of Algeria. He's a specialist on Islamic finance with a PhD from Grenoble University dedicated to financial assets evaluation in Islamic finance. And he has also the broad experience teaching Islamic finance in the country. As has been mentioned, Al Baraka Bank of Algeria is the oldest financial institution in the country, offering Islamic finance services since 1991. Joined only later by Islamic Bank Algeria in 2008, and now in the other banks that has been mentioned that are joining this year, including other 5 public banks and the 3 private banks that were mentioned that are offering now Islamic finance in the framework of Islamic windows, I guess. So from your perspective, how are these last developments perceived from the experience and daily practice of the bank? Do you see changes taking place at a more operational level? Is in this sense, is there an increase in activities or interest or understanding among the people approaching the bank? How do you perceive these changes from the activity of the bank? Thank you very much. One moment, we don't hear you. One moment. Is it? Sorry, we don't hear you. No, I don't know if there's a problem. If do you mute yourself or no? A ver, no. Okay, so shall we? Do you want to intervene later, maybe, or let's see? Yeah, but it's kind of frozen. So Okay, so maybe we have some problems with connection with Algeria. So let's move. While we solve that, it seems we don't hear you yet. Yeah.
Yes, it's okay.
So yeah, perfect. No.
Very well. Before I start, I will to thank you for your invitation first, and I would also like to greet all the speakers and as well as your guests for this participation. Okay, yes, the Bank Al Baraka of Algeria is the first financial institution, Islamic financial institution in Algeria. As my colleagues said, it appeared in 1991 when the banking market was all private operation in order to meet a specific demand by part of the population. For more than 15 years, and fortunately, Bank Al Baraka of Algeria has evolved in a quasi-monopoly situation within the Islamic banking market since the second Islamic bank opened only in 2008. Between 2008 and today, nothing has changed since the supply has remained the same while the demand has continued to increase. This stability of the market was, of course, very beneficial for the bank. Besides, I would like to say that a national daily press Owen Al Baraka Bank obtained very good financial results and found the first private bank here. However, beyond these financial benefits, the fact remains that the last change made in terms of banking regulations and the arrival of new players on the market are greeted with much enthusiasm and satisfaction by the Bank of Al Baraka Algeria. On the regulatory plane, the changes made by the Bank of Algeria in March 2020 grant Islamic banks and therefore Bank Al Baraka of Algeria legal recognition for their activities. The banking regulations officially recognize 6 different financing methods as well as investment account by describing them in details, and this gives more security. So before the regulations, Islamic banks operate in informal setting, even thought they were licensed to do so. So the changes in the arrival of competition are generally seen with apprehension, but as far as we are concerned at the level of Al Baraka Bank, we welcome this with enthusiasm because we see this new entrance as catalyst that will allow us to improve our quality of service and boost the market. It is all those elements that today makes the Al Baraka Bank favorably welcome to this change. For the second question, regarding the Al Baraka Bank of Algeria, there is no major changes in terms of its activity and services because it has always been a 100% Sharia compatible bank. Our practices and our banking products will remain the same, with a desire, of course, to further encourage online banking services like first consequences of COVID disease. So the arrival of new actors and the involvement of the administration of President Tebboune in the promotion of Islamic finance in Algeria has generated significant interest among the population. We have seen in recent months a strong enthusiasm at the level of agencies and social networks to ask if the Al Baraka Bank has the same product as those offered by Islamic windows of public banks. There are even clients of public banks who make comparison with products of Al Baraka Bank. However, I will note that this interest has not been translated in a significant increase in the amount of compatible Sharia funding granted in 2020 due to the COVID-19 crisis and its negative impact on economic growth in Algeria. Thank you. It's okay. I finished.
Thank you very much. So let me also now move now to see how the changes are perceived from what is said to be the capital of Islamic finance in Europe, London, and pass now the question to Abdel Hafid Ben Amraoui, which is connected from there. Abdel Hafid Ben Amraoui is an expert in Islamic banking and finance, and also in Islamic finance teaching, and he has participated in the launch of Islamic insurance and other financial products by Joyce in 2009, and in March 2012 he was invited also to participate in the Associate Parliamentary Group on Islamic Finance and Diversity in Financial Markets at the House of Lords. He published the first study in 2008 to investigate in particular the performance of Islamic banking in Algeria, with analyzing the experience of Al Baraka Bank then. What is the current status of Islamic banking and finance in Algeria? How does this compare to the early years when the market was first open to Islamic bankings? Bearing in mind the current developments in the area, what do you think are the main obstacles or inhibitors of Islamic finance and banking in Algeria? Any reflections on your article just mentioned published in 2008 and how this relates to today's status of Islamic banking in Algeria? So, Hansel, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Olivia, for the invitation. And also, I'd like to thank the speakers, my previous speakers. Actually, Algeria went through a series of developments in Islamic finance, which have been covered now. And I would like to focus on the practice of these institutions. So the paper I did in 2008 was mainly on Al Baraka Bank, because it was the only bank at that time. And in terms of the products, there are limited products offered by the bank and mainly focus on trade financing. So most of it is into trade and most of it is short term. And also the problem in Algeria is financial education, which is limited. So a number of people are not aware of what is Islamic banking or what is Islamic finance. And now can you refer me to my slides, please, so I can elaborate further. A slide in terms of the market share of Islamic banks in the region. Algeria market share is about 2%, in Egypt about 6%, and Tunisia around 5%, and Morocco also 2%, which is a very low market share actually. I mean, if we compare this to other countries, to the right-hand side of the graph, if we look to Iran, for example, and Sudan, is 100% Sharia compliant. So we are quite lagging behind in terms of many countries and what they do. And the most developments in Islamic finance, as you can see here in this graph, is taking place in the Middle East and also Southeast Asia. But the development in Algeria is very slow compared to those countries. There are a number of reasons why it is slow. And can you refer me to the next slide so I can elaborate further? So the first reason in terms of savings, most of the savings, as you can see, is informal savings. So most of the saving does not go into the banking system. Only 11% is through the banking system or formally saved. 23% is saved through other methods, which are non-traditional methods. Also, in terms of borrowing, most of the borrowing is informal. Only 5% of the borrowing in Algeria is actually through the banking system. And 18% is via families and friends, and 6% using other sources. So this data shows us that individuals and investors are not engaging with the banking sector. And therefore, despite of all the changes in regulations, these regulations did not turn into the ambition of Algeria to become one of the hubs in Islamic finance or Islamic banking. So in terms of the main obstacles, which I would like to now elaborate in the next slide. So the first one, based on the research I have done myself in different markets, and specifically to Algeria, is the lack of financial education and awareness of these kind of products. Individuals, most of them, they tend to use cash for their transactions and for their payments. So most of the money is outside of the banking sector. According to the recent estimates, is around $30 billion to $35 billion is in the informal market or in the black market. So this is one of the first inhibitors. The second inhibitor is the lack of competition. As was mentioned, there are only two and so there is clear lack of competition there, and without competition we cannot really enhance the quality of the services or the products that are under offer. The other reason for the lack of development is banks' reputation. Of course, the banks may say they are doing well in terms of profit, in terms of the services, but the reality is that individuals, they don't see the banks in the way that the banks see themselves. And there is a lack of trust in the banking institutions. I give you one example, so why there is a lack of competition. So for example, people, if they want to withdraw their money from a bank, for example, they may have to wait days, and sometimes they may have to wait weeks to withdraw their money. And this affects, of course, the banking reputation. And also there is an element of bureaucracy. So for example, if there is a loan application, sometimes it takes a long time to process those loan applications. And because of this, of course, it does prevent people to get and use this kind of banking services. The other element that is inhibiting the development of Islamic banking in Algeria is the banking network. As far as I know, the Al Baraka Bank, for example, has only 30 agencies. At the time when I did my research in 2008, it had 18 agencies. Of course, we can see that there is an increase in the number of agencies, but most of these agencies are actually in large cities. So most of the small cities or the medium-sized cities are not covered. Maybe because now the state-owned banks are into the Islamic banking, then there is a chance, of course, for these services to be offered to a large number of people. The other one is the payment system. The payment system in Algeria, as it stands, also is still to be considered underdeveloped. The number of ATMs, for example, the automated teller machines is very small. Sometimes those ATMs are not working, and also the use of technology in Algeria is still lagging behind. So, for example, if we try to measure this by the speed of the internet, for example, and the other measures, we need to invest more in this area, because I think the future for banking system is the online banking, and not just, to have a physical presence. So, for example, in the United Kingdom and other countries, most of the transactions now are online transactions, and the use of the branch is very, very limited. And actually, this is an opportunity for Islamic banks in Algeria if they can develop their online platforms and their online sites. The other element which has been covered well by Professor Mohammed and Professor Fatiha is the regulatory constraints. Despite of the efforts made by the Algerian government in terms of inviting Islamic players and also providing a better environment, it's still not as the same as other countries like in the Gulf states and also Southeast Asia. Of course, creating the National Sharia board is welcome to the market. We are not saying that the government is not trying, is trying, but it needs to do, far more. And it needs to create a more friendly investment environment for these banking institutions. So, for example, when I did my research in 2008, one of the problems faced by Al Baraka Bank is the liquidity, for example, when they deal with the central bank. And without addressing the issue of liquidity, the bank cannot really expand further in terms of the loans they extend or the services that they offer. And the other element is the number of products they are offering, only maybe 6 or 7 main products. And actually, if we look to the products themselves, I mean, the main products offered are Ijara, and for example, and Murabaha. I mean, Murabaha, if I'm not mistaken, and Zachary can correct me, is around 60 to 70% of the bank transactions. So the other products they are used by, they are very small. And also the element of securities or Islamic securities at the moment, I mean, there are no issue of long-term securities. And actually, this can offer an opportunity to the Algerian government to raise funds by issuing, for example, Islamic bonds. In the United Kingdom, for example, and even in other countries, it has been successful to issue this kind of securities and to fund public projects. So this can be an opportunity for the future. Also, the other element is the products which are under offer. So if we compare the financial products of the Islamic financial institutions and those of conventional ones, what we find that those of Islamic banks, they tend to be more expensive compared to the conventional ones. Of course, there are reasons why they are expensive, but this needs to be addressed. So all in all, what I want to say, there are developments. Of course, there are more players in the market, has been mentioned, more private banks joining the market, more state banks joining the market. But in practice, which matters most, I believe the authorities and the institutions, they need to do far more. So I hope that I answered your question. Thank you.
You offer us a very kind of comprehensive landscape of which are these obstacles and inhibitors of Islamic finance in the country, and obstacles that can become opportunities as well. No, thank you for also mentioning the IT element. No, how the online services can be a way of developing and jumping the need to create more branches.
This is a very good point, Olivia. I think the future, if we consider the pandemic in particular, if we look what is happening in Europe, for example, I think online platforms is the future. So I know that physical branches are important, but if we have good internet system and good online platforms, these financial institutions can do a better service from my point of view. And this is actually, as you said rightly, it is an opportunity in terms of what these institutions are actually doing.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, and you also mentioned an issue that links with the question I wanted to make to Fatiha, because you mentioned about the informality of some of the savings and borrowing practices in the country. And one of the clear objectives of the last year developments is to integrate somehow those sectors of the population that has been out of the banking sector, and in this way mobilize funds into the economy from the informal market that indeed can amount to between 30 and 35 billion according to the Algerian Central Bank. So indeed, as Abdel Hafid mentioned, if we look to financial inclusion in Algeria, some of the indicators indeed are pretty low. I was just checking the data from the financial inclusion indicators of the World Bank, and only 42% of the Algerian population over 15 years old has an account in a financial institution, no? And remember, 29% made an active use of it within the previous years, and just 2% made payments using mobile phone. Now, what we were talking about, this opportunity that is to provide for more internet and online services. So in this way, many of the experts also believe that Islamic banking could attract those customers that are out of that from the informal market to the formal market. That maybe many of them refrain from operating with conventional banks due to religious considerations. So, in this way, mobilizing all these funds could introduce liquidity and is the situation in the country in the context of low oil prices and economic crisis that has been especially increased by the pandemic. So, Fatiha, how do you see these factors of motivation behind the last changes to promote Islamic finance in the country? How do you relate it to the current socioeconomic situation of Algeria? Do you think they will have the desired effect of getting to absorb those savings and funds that are out of the banking system? And what about attracting foreign direct investment? Can that play also a role? What do you think about that?
Thank you. I want to thank the speakers because it was really interesting to hear them. And as the last one said, indeed, the Algerian financial banking and financial system needs to be modernized. That is one of, I think, the development of Islamic finance is linked to the modernization of the Algerian banking system and financial system. So I want to answer your question. I want to go back to the monetary policy of Algeria during the last decades, because from 1999 to 2014, Algeria experimented a boom in external revenues thanks to high hydrocarbon prices. The influx of hydrocarbon exports revenues not absorbed by the economy has led since 2002 to a chronic liquidity surplus, as the monetization of foreign exchange reserves exceeds the money supply. Faced with this situation, the Bank of Algeria's policy, whose principal objective was to target inflation, consisted mainly in recovering liquidity from primary banks. The absence of any real credit market deprived the economy of the instruments needed for transmitting monetary policy measures to growth. And the Revenue Regulating Fund, created in 2000 to cushion the effects of erratic oil price fluctuations on the economy, was used to freeze excess export revenues, fueling idle savings in a context of structural underfinancing of the economy. Used since 2006, to finance growing budget deficit, the fund has contributed to the opaque leakage of public spending, leading to resource waste and widespread corruption. The monetary policy during the 2 decades of Bouteflika's rule was marked by the decisive role of this fund. Although it converged with the task assigned to the Bank of Algeria to create a structural liquidity shortage in order to facilitate the implementation of monetary policy, as the IMF advises, essentially focused on inflation targeting. The massive nature of this fund, because it was he had a big amount of money inside, and this money was not invested in the economy. So the massive nature of this fund disrupted the central bank's handling of the instruments of a more complex monetary policy, able of transmitting impulses to growth. This fund increased the financial weight of the treasury by making surplus hydrocarbon revenues flow to it, in addition to the oil tax, thus enabling it to circumvent the constraints of the monetary policy by emptying of its content. In doing so, the finance administration regained its monetary power, which had been taken away from it by the 1990 reforms. Throughout this period, the authorities froze any reform of the banking system, and that is the most important. But this strategy lost its effectiveness when the oil price collapsed in 2014, exposing the vulnerabilities of the economy and its increased dependence on hydrocarbon revenues. All the more so as these revenues experience a structural decline beyond that caused by the fall of prices, linked to factors affecting both demand, as energy transition in client countries, emergence of new, more aggressive competitors, and so on, as well as supply, drop in production capacity due to non-renewal of equipment, depletion of wells, delays in prospecting, and uncontrolled increase of local consumption at subsidized prices. The economic downturn in 2014, following the drop in oil prices, caused a liquidity crisis that the Bank of Algeria tried to curb through an accommodating monetary policy, which proved ineffective due to the rigidity of the banking system. The impasse led the authorities to resort massively to quantitative easing in a situation of political crisis that paralyzed any government initiative in terms of structural reform. The two other solutions envisaged to curb the crisis in public expenditure, financing, and the balance of payment are the devaluation of the dinar and the external debt. The question is, wouldn't a different policy have made it possible to alleviate the burden of the external debt, thanks to the resource boom, while strengthening and diversifying the economy? The Hirak, this powerful, peaceful, popular movement that opposed Bouteflika's fifth presidential term, by showing its ability to harness the energy that Algeria needs to get out of its dependence on oil, gives hope that such an alternative is possible. Algeria authorities ignored the Islamic finance when this sector was booming thanks to the high oil prices. So Algeria lost the opportunity to enter an international market and a large network of financial institutions. In 2017, the Algerian government showed a sudden interest for Islamic finance. At that time, Islamic finance was in a period of big conjunctural and structural difficulties in the aftermath of the oil crisis. The aim of the government was to seek funds to finance its public deficit. The Ministry of Industry talked of seeking Islamic funds to finance infrastructures, but without legal framework, nothing happened. Could these funds accumulated in the FRR, or at least part of them, not have been invested in an Islamic sovereign fund, which would have financed ethical development projects? Indeed, there is a public disrupt of banks in Algeria, both private and public banks, reinforced by repeated scandals involving private banks with national capital as the Khalifa Bank, and more recently with the anti-corruption campaign in the wake of the Hirak, where public banks have been splashed because of bad loans or credits given to the so-called Isaba. Although Islamic banks have been spared the scandals affecting private banks, this public mistrust also affects them. They are accused to distinguishing conventional products as Islamic products. They are blamed for the misuse of benchmarks of their products with conventional products, as well as the use of human resources from conventional banks. This creates confusion between the two types of products in the public mind. This situation hinders the development of this market and does not attract new entrants. Islamic banks have specificities compared to conventional banks, which mean that the taxation in force does not allow the development of alternative products, and the prudential regulations penalize this type of organization because they do not make any transformation of short-term money, of short-term to long-term funds, and the notion of deposits is different. not to mention the classic refinancing problem they face because of the non-existence of interbank refinances mechanism. So, well, I think I don't know if I answered your question, but I wanted to add the question because this period, okay, Algeria is not indebted, has no foreign debt, and Algeria could face the oil shock because it has reserves. But on the other hand, it was a really big waste of resources because these resources were not used in an optimal way. So the question is, at least, could these funds accumulated in the fund not have been invested in an Islamic sovereign fund, which would have financed ethical development projects? Thank you.
Thank you, Fatiha. Yeah, for answering and also for questioning, which is the purpose of the roundtable. So I don't know if Muhammad will be, or if to whom we will have to make that question about what if the oil funds will have been used to create an Islamic finance fund. No, I don't know if anybody here could answer, but I'm going to pass the word to Mohammed to see, because I was going to, you also mentioned, maybe you want to react to some of the issues that Fatiha mentioned, but I was going to, some of the other speakers also, including Abdel Hafid, they spoke about the need to develop more products or other instruments, no, including the possibility of issuing bonds in the country. Do you think the current regulatory framework is prepared, or will need more development? You mentioned some of the changes that have taken place, but do you think should develop more? How to see? I was going to ask you also for the tax issue. I mean the usual problem of double taxation. I don't know if that's been solved as well.
Yeah.
If you can develop on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. Well, I shall thank Fatiha and Abdul Hafid, with whom I agree of what they said. Their analysis is quite right, I think, about the Algerian economy, the conditions in which Islamic banking is operating. Of course, we are at the very beginning. If you want me to summarize the challenges facing Islamic finance, banking and finance in Algeria, I would say they are in a number of 5. First, there is a lack or a dearth of financial culture within the Algerians. And this lack of culture, I think, it is caused by what I may say the second challenge is that interest rate practices in Algeria do not fit with the religious and cultural system of a majority of the Algerian citizens, and the result is here. There is a lack of culture, and there is very few people who deals with banks only if they need the banks. So this is a problem that should be tackled. Third problem is that the bureaucracy, whether in banks or in other institutions. So this is a problem. Even the Prime Minister and the President of the Republic of Algeria themselves, they spoke about this, and really we need to get rid of these bureaucratic behaviors. Inshallah, I think with the digitalization of the administrative practices, will help in in tackling this challenge. The third one is that, as the colleague said, there is an urgent need to modernize the banking system. And as I am a bit close to the monetary authorities, work is being done in that area. As Abdul Hafiz said it well, we need to change now to the digital banking, and this should be an opportunity for Islamic banks to develop. The last challenge is that really at this present we need to issue a new regulatory text specially designed for Islamic banking and financial matters. Just 2 days ago, I was invited to a meeting in the Ministry of Finance, and we have debated about about all these issues. There is in feuille de route roadmap, as we say in English, to tackle all these obstacles, and inshallah within the few months coming, a lot of things will be done for the Islamic banking and finance to create a better economic environment for Islamic finance to develop, concerning the double taxation, concerning the possibility of issuing sukuk. Of course, we are waiting for the text ruling the takaful industry. I think it should be published within coming days. What else? So I means all the ruling body that needs to be settled down, we are working on, inshallah, within the I think that by the end of this year, all the Islamic finance environment will take place, inshallah. Then we may say that Islamic finance is having a good prospects in Algeria. It is just a matter of time, Olivia.
Yeah, I guess it's taking it's in the moment of change. So it's very interesting. Thanks for sharing, because it's very interesting to see those changes and debates taking place in the
Yes.
country, seeing live. And thanks for sharing and about explaining that roadmap, to really create that Islamic finance framework or environment. Thank you. So I'm going to go back to Zakaria to see, because there was also some, maybe you want to refer to some of the questions, but I was going to ask you as well about, because also Abdel Hafid mentioned the need that there are few contracts, no? In that sense, from the perspective of the Al Baraka, how do you see? I mean, what kind of products or contracts are more used and by the public, or how do you see which products are more demanded by the population, or have a broader, or even which ones have a broader potential for growth, in terms of mortgages, insurances, or consumption products. And so do you think there is, we also were mentioning about also Fatiha and others mentioned that there is indeed, and also Mohammed mentioned, that there's a real demand for and scope for Islamic products among the population. How do you see this demand from the banks and from the activity? Thank you. Yeah, Zakaria? I don't know if are you hearing me? Zakaria, are you hearing me? Maybe he's not hearing us, or okay, maybe I think he has not heard us because, okay, so I will pass the question to the next speaker, Abdel Hafid, because I also wanted to speak, Fatiha mentioned how, in a way, the point of not using the funds to develop the industry further before we have the country has missed a bit the opportunity to enter the international market. No, when the moment where the Islamic finance globally was growing exponentially, Algeria was a bit behind, and now is trying to retake that path. No, so how do you see Islamic banking prospects in Algeria, and what solutions you will propose to develop Islamic banking and finance in Algeria and the Maghreb region? Also thinking of the obstacles you mentioned before.
Many thanks, Olivia, and many thanks to the speakers. Very insightful information given here. I think most importantly is to do what is right, and just to please ourselves and to hear what we want to hear. So in terms of the Algeria economic prospects and what can we do, I'd just like to refer first to the data, if the person can put me into my slides again. Into the macroeconomic data, as you can see, the outlook for the future does not look great, although, as Fatiha mentioned, from 2000, let's say, to 2010 or 15, Algeria reserves and also paid its foreign debt. But the foreign reserves at the moment are declining and continue to decline. And also Algeria is relying on the oil exports. And as we know that the oil price has dropped dramatically, it used to be $115 a barrel, and now is between $60 to $70 a barrel. So as you can see in these graphs, which I generated from the African Economic Outlook, most of these indicators are in the red line. So the GDP per capita is expected to be minus 0.1 in 2021. The inflation is expected to go up into 5.4% in 2021. The budget deficit also is negative. The current account as a percentage of GDP is going to be minus 10.8%. So it is a time for a reflection and a time for taking the right decisions. And I think Islamic finance and Islamic banking can really help. Particularly, we know that a large amount of money is outside of the financial system. Therefore, the Islamic finance can be used as a tool or as a mechanism to bring this money back into the banking system, and can be used to finance investments and to finance economic development. So in terms of what I perceive as solutions to the future, and if you can take me to the next slide, please. So the first solution I see myself is, as Mohammed mentioned, is the financial culture in Algeria. People are not really engaged with the financial system and with the banking system. Of course, this may be due to the payment system. We said it's underdeveloped, or the lack of confidence in the system, in the banking system or the financial system itself. But it's very important to improve financial education. And based on my experience here in the UK and maybe some in other countries as well, financial education needs to be even in the curriculum. So it's very important for those who are involved in the design of the curriculum to include this element of financial education. So people are becoming financially educated, and they know, for example, what is meant by savings, what is meant by investment products, how to save, how to invest, and so forth. In the same pipeline, it's very important to increase awareness of Islamic finance. For example, how these products work, and for example, why they are considered to be different from conventional products, and so forth. The second solution I consider is to provide incentives for Islamic finance providers. So, for example, in terms of liquidity, we need to provide, instruments, innovative instruments to allow for better liquidity for these banks and to allow them to take more risks. And also, for example, in terms of incentives for foreign investors or for foreign financial institutions, we can also provide better incentives and attract other foreign financial institutions from the Gulf region or other markets. And the other one is, of course, is the payment system. It's very important to increase the ITMs, the automated teller machines, so people can withdraw their money when they want, at the time they want. So that's very important. And as we said, is to incorporate new technologies. As you know, for example, in Europe, in America, there is emergence of what they call a fintech or financial technologies. I think fintech can be very effective also in Algeria and can be used and can help, the economic development of Algeria. And the fourth one, of course, is to diversify the current portfolio of Islamic banking. The current products are very small and most of them are used in short-term financing, and there is only a small amount is used in medium-term financing or long-term financing, and also a large amount is used in the financing of consumption. So for the Islamic finance to play a part, money needs also to go for investments and for productivity. So money needs to go, for example, needs to finance agriculture and other sectors which can add into the economic growth of Algeria. So we need to move from the consumption into more in investments. And the other element, which is the final element, of course, is the issue of Islamic-based securities, particularly for the Algerian government may issue sukuk, which can help the Algerian government to raise funds. So in conclusion, it's, the prospects, they look good. For Algeria. Algeria has a potential, is the 10th largest country in the world, is a country for 43 million population. Most of its population is young, and also has immense financial power and also resources. And I think Islamic finance can play a part in using all of this, and hopefully we can see Algeria, developing in the future. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I'm happy for this positive note to end. And I think you mentioned some issues already that maybe we will take, especially the issue of financial education and awareness of Islamic finance products. No, I think that was a problem that was also perceived in the case of Morocco when we were following it up. How the population was not really aware of what really the products of Islamic finance mean, or how they work, and the need to work in that direction. I guess the financial education will be part of this need to continue working, as Mohammed said, on this environment, on the roadmap. I think I'm afraid we have lost contact with Albaraka or Zakaria, or I don't know if he's connected. No, he's back. I don't know if he's able to take, because there's some problems with the sound. It seems that the image frozen, so we can. Zakaria, do you hear us, or no? It seems that because I don't know, we give him the chance to answer the question before. Zakaria, do you hear us from Algeria? Hello? No, it seems that we are having some problems. So, if you want, we have to.
Which I would like to add, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Algeria has a number of immigrants, particularly in France, which is a very large population, and also in other countries. And also, I would appreciate maybe developing these products towards immigrants, Algerian immigrants. So the Algerian immigrants become part of this development in Islamic finance and banking. Because as you just mentioned about Morocco and Tunisia, our neighbors, for example, not necessarily in Islamic finance, but in conventional banking, a number of the people from Morocco and Algeria also, and Tunisia, sorry, it's used. So I think we can learn, from other countries, and also maybe creating Islamic financial products which are designed for people who are abroad or outside Algeria.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's part of this regional regional development. No, if you want, I'm going to pass the
Can I,
word to
can I
Gonzalo.
intervene? Can
Yeah,
I
yeah,
intervene? Last
yeah.
issue. I thank Abd Hafid for raising this issue. Actually, I think 2 weeks ago, I had a meeting with the CEO, the PDG of Banque Extérieure d'Algérie, and they are really thinking of launching an Islamic financial desk, as we said, in guichet, in France. So something is being prepared now, and inshallah, all the outlets that may help to mobilize money for the benefit of the Algerian economy, inshallah, they will be available. What I want to say, that there is a political volunteer really to develop Islamic finance, whether in Algeria or abroad, as you said. We are thinking, ma'am, going to Africa. But all what we need now is to give us time. We are working slowly, but inshallah, with no, what I say, no fault, yani. Inshallah, we are doing our best. Believe me, the time I am consacrating for you now, it will cost me a lot because I have a lot of other things to do. So just give time to time, inshallah, within the near future, Islamic banking, inshallah, will have its place within the financial ecosystem of Algeria, and we need all experts to contribute to the success of this workshop, if you like. I need Fatiha, I need Abdel Hafid, I need Olivia, all experts around the world. Their ideas, their opinions are most welcomed.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, also for that open mind and welcoming all us in this effort to promote Islamic finance in the country. I hope we don't delay too much the changes, as you mentioned. I know you are very busy in trying to develop this new roadmap. I'm just going to give the floor now to Gonzalo Rodriguez to make the first reaction. And we have at least 2 questions from the public, so if you may, we can take them and just take a bit more of your time. Gonzalo, whenever you want.
Okay, thank you, Olivia. What a beautiful word, Mohammed. You know that big travels start with small steps. Okay, so thank you, Olivia, for organizing and this debate and with us. And it's great to know that in Algeria things has been happened from very old times. I didn't know that in 1929 there was something like the Islamic Algeria Bank, or that in the 90s AOFI was created there. Or so for us at the center, Algeria was in dark in terms of data. So it's very, very interesting to know all these things. As the Arab proverb said, Asabar Jamil, is something like the patient is good. So I hope that with this new regulation, the industry could help the country in these uncertain times, especially after the macro indicators we have seen before. So I have collected some facts. For example, that 42% of the population, according to the World Bank, is unbanked. And you have around 43 million people in Algeria. Only 2% use of internet or mobile payments. Only 2% of these payments are being doing through internet. You have a huge informal market. I have heard that in a survey, in an interview that I've been watching before, that somebody says that it could take 6 months to proceed a loan application in Algeria in the bank, and for example, only 5% of the borrowing is via bank actually. So there's a lot of informal banking in the country. So, and I think Dr. Fatih has said before that the system is quite archaic now. It's also interesting because I agree with him what said Abderrahman Ben Khalifa, which is a former finance minister of Algeria and former head of the country's banking association, and said that it is not only necessary to extract these resources, but also to inject them into the banks in order to strengthen the economy. Even though not only the people are not using banks because of their religion beliefs, I do think that if we see the fact that almost 11 million people of Algeria are under 30 years old, so it's very young population, around 30% of the country. I think Islamic finance has a great opportunity to catalyze a change regarding the use of money and banking in Algeria. If we add the new massive use of internet, the youth of your population, and the new fresh and secure way to make banking, I think we have, or you have, a great opportunity to strengthen to help your country through this Islamic finance industry. So I have just 2 questions. Okay, both of them you have been talking about, and you mentioned some things about that. First of all, it's about Islamic fintech. I would like to know if you think that Islamic fintech could be the way to expand the industry. Even though you said that only 6 banks have 90% of the market, I don't know if you think that there is place for other players, like Facebook, or because maybe we are thinking like in an ancient way, because now if your people are so young and everybody's using Facebook or things like that, and now these kind of platforms are starting using borrowing money, for example, and starting acting like a bank. This is what I think is going to happen in the new next years in Europe and in other parts of the world. So do you think there is place for other players that could use Islamic banking in or change the way the people are banking in Algeria? And another question is, what is the Islamic finance awareness of the population? That the people understand the products, the way it works? Because in my experience in Morocco, for example, people doesn't understand very well what was Islamic finance. So they think that was just like things like zakat or something like that, but they didn't understand. The awareness was very, very low. And I would like to know if in Algeria, the awareness is better than in other countries as your neighbors. So as Mr. Abdel Hafid said before, I think that even though there's a lot of innovators, as you mentioned, I do believe that there are a great opportunity for Algeria if they increase the use of Islamic finance and they start using this industry much more now, and I hope this could help your country. So Olivia, I don't know if somebody can.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Gonzalo. Yeah. I was expecting you to ask about the fintech, which is the. Yeah. But I'm going to try to see if we can another chance to connect with Al Baraka Band, Zakaria Sliman, if you are connected. Let's see if maybe he could answer the question about the awareness about the population of Islamic banking. What is their perspective? Can you hear us now, Zakaria? Do you hear us?
Yes, I am listening to you. Okay, so as far as I'm concerned, I'm convinced that that the demand for Islamic banking product will increase in Algeria naturally. But to be sure that the demand will increase, the authorities must go further in the regulation, because the regulation now, as Professor Boujalel said, is in the beginning, but there is many lag in this regulation. And this lag are creating a doubt among the population first, and this doubt can maybe let some of the people out of the Islamic finance, even if they are interested about it. The second point is about, the education. The majority of people in Algeria doesn't know very well the products of Islamic finance. They know one of them is the most, famous is Murabaha. And this is why they use it, and it is the first product in the Islamic Bank in Algeria, for example, in Al Baraka, because it is the most famous product among the population. So do you
Thank you very much for that. So let's see if maybe some of the other participants will respond to the question about the possibility of new players.
I'm happy to answer the questions that Gonzalo asked. So for fintech, actually, fintech is the future, as Gonzalo said, is the future of finance and banking, and we cannot ignore this. And actually, there are a number of developments taking place in Islamic banking and finance, for example, in the Middle East. So, for example, in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, for example, United Arab Emirates, they developed a number of fintech products which are Islamically accepted or accepted by the Sharia. So we maybe need to learn from these countries. We may need to look into these countries and what they did and how we can do or do even better, from my point of view. Because the P2P crowdfunding, for example, the use of wallets, electronic wallets, and so forth, is becoming a very good channel, actually, to fund individuals and to finance, small or medium-sized enterprises. And I think, for example, my suggestion to Al Baraka Bank, which is still the major player in Islamic finance in Algeria, is maybe to help to create, like this fintech. Usually the fintech can be created as a separate entity, or it can be linked to a financial institution. So Al Baraka Bank, for example, or Salam Bank could maybe do something similar from my point of view. In terms of awareness, because now we have these social media platforms like the Facebook, like the Twitter and other the platforms, I think these can be used to increase awareness. We can also introduce this into the education system. It's not really late, to improve financial education. So we can reach people via social media. We can also organize sessions, maybe in schools, for example, about this kind of products through these roundtables, for example, through other channels as well. So there are solutions, but the only thing what is needed is the will of the authorities, the will of the institutions, and of course the will of the people. And by doing this, I think things can be addressed, or they can be made happen. And thank you.
Thanks a lot. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take it. We have a couple of 3 questions from the audience, and maybe then I will give you the floor, Mohammed. Or do you want to respond quickly to this?
Yes, quickly, very quickly. I think competition is the key of success. Of course, Al Baraka and the Salam, they did a very good job. They are really the locomotive of Islamic finance in Algeria for the last 30 years at least. But now that public banks are launching Islamic products, I think Islamic finance will have good days ahead because of this competition, as I said. Second point is that we have got a big job of awareness to do. Really, I intervened of times in the Algerian television to explain what is Islamic finance, what is Islamic banking. So there is, yes, a big job of awareness to do. And then, inshallah, by the time, inshallah, people will understand that really the products we are launching are Sharia compliant. And inshallah, we will get their confidence. And we hope that anyway, the little experience with the public banks which have launched deposit accounts, we can say that results are encouraging. People are putting their savings in these Sharia compliant accounts, and they told us that we did not put this money, their savings, in interest-based accounts because of riba. So, inshallah, as I say, we need to give time to time, and maybe within 1 year we will make a remake of this video conference. Inshallah, we will get the results. Inshallah, good results. Okay, Olivia.
Thank you very much. So I take that care, and we try to organize something next year to see how things are going. We have several questions from the audience, so let me just take them together, and then I collect another round of quick replies. They're from Hassan Gibrat from Salam and Gateway. Thank you for your questions, Hassan. And I'm going to take the first one because it was linking with what we were just talking about the issue of the new players, about the need of competition that Mohammed also mentioned. One moment, now I have lost it. Or is it? It was about he's saying, Salam, thank you for the roundtable. He's asking, will Gulf or Malaysian banks enter Algeria to offer Islamic banking services? And then let me just to link, because it says to follow up. Can the panelists also talk about the potential sovereign sukuk in Algeria? I think that was a bit mentioned before, and which are the challenges and whether the current law covers it or not. Then he also asks, will Algeria adopt the AOFI or IFSB or other standards for the Islamic financial institutions? So if you want, I would give you another round if you want to comment on that. Who wants to? And then with that we will end, and we won't consume more time from your busy agendas.
I am not sure if the person is talking about this international financial standards. I mean, there are standards which are national and there are others which are international. So, of course, Algeria is like other countries, particularly like Al Baraka Bank and the Salam Bank and even the state-owned banks would be happy to incorporate, some of these international standards, because I think it's to their interest. And there are a number of standards which are related to governance, for example, how these banks should be governed, and there are standards related to the structure and so forth. So I think it's from my point of view, it's to the interest of the Islamic finance providers to embrace these international standards related to Islamic banking or related to Islamic finance. For the first question, maybe about Sukuk, a number of governments have been successful in issuing Sukuk, and I don't see why Algeria will not be successful as well. I think the Algerian government can be very successful in issuing sukuk in the future. There is a mechanism for this. The only thing which I would suggest is, I mean, the funds raised through sukuk is to be used, I mean, in investment-based projects, and for example, to specific projects that would improve the economy of Algeria. This is my answer.
Okay, thanks a lot, Abdel Hafid. We have another question. I don't know if anybody else wants to answer some of the questions from Hassan, or I will go back to the other.
No. Olivia, I meant just rapidly. As Abdel said, Islamic financial industry has now its own standards, and they are by IOFI, by IFSB, Islamic Financial Service Board in Malaysia as well. So those are international standards derived from the Islamic rules. So they are applicable to all the industry internationally. And all the countries that are now practicing Islamic banking, they refer to these standards. We've got Sharia standards, we've got accounting standards, and governing standards. So it means that Islamic finance is an international practice, but each country, of course, have to abide to the specific law. So it means what is practiced in a country, it should be Sharia compliant, but also it should comply with the legislative corpus of that country. The most important thing is that there is no transgression to Islamic rules. And as I said, those standards help us a lot. Actually, us in Algeria, we often refer to these Sharia standards. So, as I said, Islamic finance industry has the same standards, but each country use them taking account to the specific regulatory text of each country.
Thanks a lot. I don't know if anybody has more comments on this. We have another two questions. I don't know if we have time for it. We have overpassed a bit the time we were expecting. So it was just, if you want to mention them, and then we just finish up with that. First of all, it's Said Suam who comments on the issue of informality that was already mentioned. He is wondering whether informality won't be the principal obstacle for the development of Islamic finance, as it is the case for the standard finance. I think that was mentioned indeed as one of the obstacles by Abdel Hafid, but maybe if you want to comment something else. And then Hassan also makes another question about whether the panel think that it's important for Algeria to get a credit rating in order to issue any kind of international sukuk or conventional bond in the future. So with that, I think I will give you the chance to give a last comment, a quick comment if you want, and then we close with this. Thank you. Yeah, Fadiha.
I wanted just to raise a point about the way the public, the Algerians are in confidence with the Islamic finance. It is the question of the different schools of the Islamic law in Algeria, because we know that Algeria is dominated by Malikite school, but there are minorities as in the Mzab, for example. We know also that I had a question to others, but that the more open to Islamic finance than the Maliki, and that there is a discussion between the at the religious level to harmonize the rules in order to have the same rule, and it is the role of these international boards as the Islamic Financial Service Board. So is there a discussion in Algeria about the difference between different schools regarding the Islamic finance?
Okay, thank you, Fatiha, to take the issue.
From my side, like the Baraka Bank, which is part of the Baraka Group, I would expect the bank anyway, to follow, for example, the AAOIFI, which is on the accounting standards, and even those related or issued by the FASB. But as Mohammed said, countries, they have their own legislation, so they need to incorporate these international standards within the legislation of the country. I think most importantly is to make sure that these products are fully Sharia compliant. And the government now has created, the National Fatwa Board. So this board definitely will look into these instruments and to ensure that each product is certified and complies with Sharia. So I think is more into how now this is exercised and how it is presented, because I believe, as Mohammed said, I think the authorities and the National Sharia Board are taking the necessary steps to ensure that everything is compliant. Therefore, the next step is how we can put this now into practice and how we ensure that the people of Algeria, the individuals of Algeria, can benefit from these services. Because at the end of the day, is not just saying that it's Sharia is enough. For example, it's more about the quality of the services that the bank is offering, and also how these services is meeting the requirements of the individuals or the investors, small or large. And thank you.
Yeah, yes. May I intervene, Olivia?
Yeah.
Yes, I should thank Abd when he said that Sharia compliance is the first step. Then we've got to look to the efficiency of the service, etc. But I would I just like to rassurer en français. Ça fait longtemps que je n'ai pas utilisé l'anglais. My colleague Fatiha, we've got within the National Sharia Board an eminent scholar of Ibadi School, which is Professor Mustafa Bajou. He's from Ghardaya University, and the government himself is careful about that. We will take into account the two schools, Malikit and Ibadi, and even all other schools for when tackling the compliance of products presented to the National Sharia Board. So that's why I say the AOFI takes or develop their standards by referring to all Islamic schools, even the Shia schools. So from that point of view, there is less problems with transaction practices than purely religious practices, ibadat, I would say. So from that point of view, be sure that we take into account all Sharia schools, particularly the Ibadi and Malikit in Algeria.
Thanks a lot. Yes, Gonzalo?
Yes, just one question. It's very interesting what Dr. Fatiha has said about the Islamic law schools. And I take the opportunity to make an announcement, is that in April, 6th April, we are going to host a webinar session regarding the Islamic law schools, especially the Maliki schools, and how this has been processed in Emirates, in Saudi Arabia, and as you know, the Maliki law school is what we used to have here at Al-Andalus too, in Morocco, and
Yes.
in Spain, and Al-Andalus in Morocco, and that's why we think it's very interesting. So you are much more welcome to this session, okay? So just that, it's very interesting this. But I think we don't have time to to enter in that issue.
Yeah, we are receiving more questions, but I'm afraid we will have to close. We have just to mention Dr. Kalim Alam asked about the takaful, whether the new regulation takes into account the takaful as well. Just to mention that we were some weeks ago, there has been a draft to regulate takaful businesses. So I don't know if you want to add. I think that we have taken enough time. Thank you thank you to everybody for the questions, for following up from different parts of the world. Thank you to all of you for taking your time to share your knowledge and perspectives about the issue. It's very interesting. We will keep the idea that we are in a moment of change in Algeria. Very interesting, and well, change needs time, as Mohammed said, but we can say there is a strong potential for growth of Islamic finance in the country. We'll follow up in Nigeria what is going on. Just to mention, we will try to follow up with a series of new conferences this year, also in Tunisia, hopefully, and maybe in Libya in the coming months. So we will welcome you all to follow with us. And again, thank you for all of you. It has been very interesting. We have learned a lot. Thanks for joining us. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivia. Thanks
With
all.
that, we thanks to all.
Thank you.